The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey folks, thanks for joining the webinar. We have Mike Watchmaker and Andy Beyer here to talk about the Preakness weekend. Mike, you want to take the reins here and lead the way?
Sure, Jake. Hi, Andy. I guess the big question is, Andy, I guess the big question is Preakness is, I mean, are you disappointed at the character of the field? I mean, we don't have the Derby winner or the first place Derby finisher in it. Is it a concern to you, or do you perhaps find it a better betting race? What's your overall feeling about
it's lousy. I mean, the Preakness. Anytime there's a buzz around the Preakness, it's because of the speculation. Could the Derby winner win the Triple Crown? And when you take the two top horses, the winner and the other winner out of the race, I don't see how even NBC is going to gin up any interest in this race. I think we should, Mike, if I may suggest, I think we should maybe start our discussion with a review of the Derby and the disqualification. I mean, we both opined on it in print with very different points of view. Would you like to make your case?
Sure. Maximum Security drifted out nearing the stretch and fouled three horses. Two of the horses that he fouled were going in reverse, but the other one, War of Will, was not. War of Will was beaten all of 2 lengths by the third place finisher in the race, and the trouble that Maximum Security caused War of Will was much more than mere 2 lengths, and that's just a conservative view of it. There is no question that Maximum Security cost War of Will a better placing in the Kentucky Derby, perhaps, and even on the board finish. Like I said, War of Will was only 2 lengths behind the third place finisher in the Kentucky Derby, and the horse was moved up to second. That's a lot of money at stake, and it's a lot of residual stallion value as well. Maximum Security violated the rules of racing. He didn't keep a straight path, and I think he absolutely deserved to come down. And in 99.9% of the other races run in America, he would have come down. And I think that it's high time that the Derby does not get special dispensation and allow horses to do whatever they want on the racetrack.
Well, I disagree with almost everything you said, but particularly the idea that a foul is a foul and it's against the rules of racing, and it would have an infraction like this would have resulted in a disqualification in an ordinary race. Let me tell you the way I saw this. Yes, Maximum Security, committed a foul because the rules of racing say you can't take another horse's path. They say you can't bump or interfere with another horse. The rules say a lot of things that are never enforced in any race. There's always contact in the early stages of a race. Horses are always crossing in front of each other. I mean, if the rules of racing, were enforced to the letter of the law, I mean, the sport would be chaos. There could be a DQ in any race, and so the standards that stewards apply in the real world, is whether the infraction cost a horse, a win or a high placing. And in my view, of the Derby, it didn't. War of Will would have never won this race. I don't think he would finish in the top 4 without the trouble. I mean, when as I watched the replay, the first couple times before all this controversy really erupted, I mean, my notes on the race were, slight, steady outrun. I didn't think that this was a big deal infraction. Gaffalione, steadied this horse, steadied War of Will, and was back in the race in a stride or two. I couldn't even have called it a length's worth of trouble, and he had a quarter of a mile with clear sailing in the stretch after that to catch maximum security. He got within, he recovered. He got within a length of the leader, and then he was, he was falling apart at the end. And horses, in the last 16th, horses were flying past him while he backed up to finish 8th. I just don't see this as being enough trouble to take down the best horse.
I'm absolutely flabbergasted, Andy, because I think we were watching the same race, but everything you said makes me think that we weren't watching the same race. Your second sentence in, you said that according to the rules of racing, maximum security committed a foul, and I don't think you needed to go any further than that. But I think more troubling I think more troubling is that your stance that if the rules of racing were enforced to the letter, we'd have chaos. I actually think absolutely the opposite. If the rules of racing were enforced to the letter, I think we'd have a cleaner game. I think there would be a lot less nonsense going on out at the racetrack, a lot less herding, a lot less gamesmanship leaving the gate in the first 100 yards of every race. And I actually think it would be a safer sport for both jockey and equine. I don't want to divert this webinar to debate that, but I'll certainly give you an opportunity to respond to that, and then we can go on and speak about the Preakness. But the only other thing I got to say is that I watched the Derby like you watched the Derby, and I think it was actually a minor miracle that War of Will's legs weren't entangled with maximum security's legs, because they were very close to being entangled, and it's a minor miracle that War of Will wasn't dropped in the race.
Well, we all watched the slow motion replay on NBC, many times, and which certainly made this look like a potential calamity. It might have been, but it reminded me of all the cases, when the new rules came in pro football, the number of times you would watch a receiver catch a ball, in slow motion, and, for like a millisecond, the ball hit the ground, and so it's all, we've got to rule this an incompletion. I mean, you just, watching it in real time, to me, this was not a big deal. And the idea that a foul is a foul, the rules of racing never exclude action at the starting gate. But when do stewards take horses down for even serious bumps or interference coming out of the gate? Remember Beyer,
Andy, that's a
2014 Breeders' Cup.
And that's a development over the last 20 years or so that I actually think is bad for the game, not good for the game. I remember as a youth, going to Saratoga and following a horse, because I grew up in New England, following a horse that shipped from Rockingham Park, who was very well met, and betting him that day at Saratoga. He was trained by Zeke Benasian, and he came in and he bumped the horse lightly out of the gate, and they disqualified the horse, and the stewards actually brought myself and the crew that I was in to watch the replay and explain to us why the horse was disqualified. It's actually a development in the game that I think is a bad
if it was a New England horse, the fix could have been in. Who knows?
Yeah, well, maybe. But in any event, actually, I've watched various views, and I recommend that people actually look at the alternate head-on view that was posted by the Kentucky Derby, the official Kentucky Derby's Twitter feed. And if you watch the alternate head-on view that they posted it there, not the NBC feed, not NBC cameras, something different. If you watch that and you take a look at that, perhaps you might see it the way I see it. But I think we really should move on to the Preakness. And we talked about how
I hope you're including War of Will in your exactas after the way he was so destroyed in the Kentucky Derby.
Do you want me to reveal my top pick right now? I'll be happy to. It's War of Will.
Let's talk about the Preakness.
Okay. I mean, one of my introductory questions to you is, because of not having the first place finisher in the Derby or the official Derby winner in this race, does it make it a better betting race to you, Andy? Or do you think that there are just a few horses in this race that have a chance to win, and a lot of horses that simply are too slow to win?
I mean, I don't think it makes, I think it's a reasonably competitive race. I mean, from the betting standpoint, I mean, it's okay, but, I mean, you can't, I just, unfortunately, like for a Preakness, it certainly doesn't have much luster.
Correct. Who do you like to win this race?
Well, well, first of all, I will start by taking a position against War of Will with all the people who are going to be betting on him, because he had all of this terrible trouble in the Derby, and needless to say, I mean, Bodie Express won't be among my tickets too. I mean, he was interfered with. He was going nowhere. I mean, I have boiled this race down to two horses. I mean, one of them is the favorite, Improbable. Overall, based on his overall record, he's the best horse. I mean, I thought he was my Derby future horse after the Rebel at Oaklawn. I didn't think that his Kentucky Derby was all that great, but in the 19 horse field and the slop, I guess it was okay. I mean, he was sort of, I thought on the turn he was really outkicked by others, but he kept plugging away, and he's okay. I mean, I can't love him off his Derby, but he's the most accomplished horse in the race. Having said that, I'm betting Owen Dale. I thought that his race in the Lexington Stakes at Keeneland, which is sort of a post bluegrass, maybe this will get you into the Kentucky Derby kind of race. It didn't draw a great field, but I thought Owen Dale made a move in that race that was kind of as visually, at least as visually impressive as any other horse, as any horse in this field. I mean, he made a big 4-wide swoop. It was I thought a powerhouse effort. He actually, to my surprise, when I was doing the figures, he got a a legitimately strong figure in 98, which is a point ahead of the field of the Preakness. And he's got a trainer in Brad Cox who's very good. I mean, when his horses get good, they usually stay good. So at 10-1, I mean, that's the play for me.
I think both of these horses have excellent chances to win, Andy. I picked Improbable second and Owendale fourth. Improbable was my Derby horse from the start of the year. I loved his race in Los Alamitos Futurity. He was the kind of horse last year that I thought had only begun to scratch the surface of his abilities. He only really kind of applied himself very late in the La Salle Futurity and in the Street Senses Other Stakes win last year. And when he applied himself late in those races, all of a sudden he just drew off to win by explosive margins. I wasn't that turned off by his narrow miss in the Rebel in his first start this year. I know that Long Range Toddy, who upset him that day, saved more ground, and Improbable was wide all the way. But if Improbable was the horse I thought he was, even with the ground loss that day and having a clear lead mid-stretch, I didn't think he should have been caught. I thought his race in the Arkansas Derby, finishing second to the brutally unlucky Omaha Beach, is the best race that anybody in this field shows on paper. And it's not even close. I mean, he was very game that day, was beaten only a length, just a strong effort. Improbable was my pick in the Kentucky Derby, and I thought he ran okay. He didn't have nearly as much trouble as other horses did. He finished only a length and a quarter in front of War of Will, who was almost dropped during the stretch. But he was uncomfortable. I think in between and behind horses for most of the way. And then, when he was clear in the stretch, he just didn't have much kick. I agree with you about his overall record. It's very attractive. He's going to have to do better than he did in the Derby. And I think, if we have a fast track on Saturday, and I know that there's some showers have entered into the forecast, I think even with his pedigree, I mean, he's by City Zip out of an AP&D mare, I think he's going to be better suited getting back on a fast track. And I still believe that Improbable's got a better race in him that he's shown so far. I just don't know if this is going to be the spot to do it, and he's going to be, I think, a clear favorite in the race. And so I tried to beat him. As for your other horse, Owendale, I picked him in the Risen Star in my Saturday Weekend Warrior column, and he won before that, and he won the Lexington after that. In the Risen Star, my faith was rewarded with a dismal 8th place finish, beating 10 lengths. Right.
So thank you very much. But he did run well in the Lexington. However, there are a couple of things I want to say about it. I think he was very nicely set up by the pace. I mean, on paper, if you just look at the Cold Pass performances, the pace of the Lexington doesn't look fast at all. But when you compare it to the other route races run that day, the pace was pretty quick. And I think he was set up nicely by the pace. Of course, mitigated that. Some of that may be mitigated by the fact that he was 5 wide around the far turn. My one concern about Owendale is, as explosive as that move was in the Lexington, that was a 1 16th race. And he's going 1 3/16 this time against better horses. He's up in class and he's up in distance. And I'm a tiny bit skeptical about whether or not he can produce a stronger kick at this longer distance. And I'll ask you if you have any reservations in that regard after I talk about my top pick, War of Will. War of Will, look, we obviously have a disagreement of opinion, Andy, over the kind of trouble he had in the Derby. The way I saw the Derby, he was full of run from the outset, and he was full of run at the time that he was followed by Maximum Security. And I give him credit for fighting on until deep stretch before finally giving in. As I said, he was beaten 2 lengths by the third finisher after serious trouble. What I think is kind of forgotten about all this is that War of Will suffered an injury early in the Louisiana Derby, like the second or third stride out of it, to his right hind. And he got absolutely nothing out of that race. So the Kentucky Derby was really War of Will's first
legitimate representative outing in 11 weeks back to his risen star. Now, I got to tell you, when he won the risen star, when he won the Lecomte, no one was a bigger War Wheel skeptic than I was, because he got sweet trips in those races, and he was running against horses that at the time we didn't think were all that good, although we did beat Country House on the risen star. But he got sweet trips in those races, and he really didn't run all that fast. I thought if a horse gets a perfect setup like he did in those two races and didn't run fast, to me, that's a red flag. But I thought he ran very well in the Derby. He was full of run every step of the way. And since he didn't have a representative outing in 11 weeks, I actually think he can benefit physically from that race and take a step forward Saturday. And let me
interject one thought, playing off what you just said. I mean, but if he had not had the trouble that you consider serious and I don't, I mean, wouldn't we be saying he had a dream trip in the Derby? Post one, he's sitting behind the speed, while so many other horses are getting mud kicked in their face or going 6 wide or whatever. I mean that, and then he angled out past the leader or versus the leader when the incident happened. But I mean, even if you want to give him more credit than I do for his trouble, I mean, it came in the context, of a very easy, stalking, ground-saving trip.
Well, he had a good trip. He had a good trip for the first 15/16 of a mile of the 1.25 mile Kentucky Derby. The rest of it was an absolute nightmare. I mean, and that's a significant portion of the race. I mean, that's more than the final 1/4 mile of the race. So, I mean, yeah, sure, he was sitting, but he was also full of run. I mean, I think anyone looking at the race objectively would have to say that Gaffalione had an armful of horse every step of the way, even at the time he was up to the point he was fouled by Maximum Security. So I understand your point, Andy. I mean, and I got a little problem with them showing post one in the past performances, because what they did is they moved everybody out of gate when we had that other scratch when High Call came out, and in a technical sense, Warwill actually broke from post 2, and he had it even a little bit easier because he didn't have to contend with the inside post, which could be very problematic in that 20-horse gate in the Kentucky Derby. So, I got a little issue with that because that is technically not correct in the past performances. But the other horse, I wanted to mention one other horse in here too, because we have to make 1, 2, 3, 4 picks of the racing form. Right. And I picked War of Will over Improbable. And my third pick in the race, Owendale was my 4th pick, and my 3rd pick in the race was Bourbon War. And Bourbon War, I think, is kind of a weird horse. I mean, he was my weekend warrior play in the Fountain of Youth, in the Florida Derby, and he didn't run well, but of course the pace was not at all to his favor. I mean, it was an extremely slow-paced race in the Florida Derby. They went around the track. The fact that Bode Express went around the track second all the way behind Maximum Security will tell you, how slow the pace was and how it was impossible to close into that pace. And he ran well. He was a fast closing second in the Fountain of Youth 2 starts back to Code of Honor, who with a great trip in the Kentucky Derby was the 3rd horse under the wire in the Kentucky Derby. But that race, the Fountain of Youth, had a pace collapse of historic proportions. So I think Bourbon War is going to get a better setup than he got in the Florida Derby. He's not going to get the kind of setup he got in the Fountain of Youth, but I still think he's the kind of horse that could come along and be in the picture. What do you think of Bourbon War, Andy?
Well, for once we agree on something, Mike. I picked him 3rd, for the exact same reasons. In the in the Florida Derby, as you noted, I mean, he was compromised by that slow pace that I thought was, made, maximum security like a dubious proposition in the Kentucky Derby, but there's no getting around the fact that it was extremely slow. And he, after the speeds finished 1-2 in that race, I mean, he was he was closing almost as well as Code of Honor, who, went into the Kentucky Derby, kind of at least looking on paper like the big closer in the field. So that was a pretty good, that was a pretty good effort. And, as you say, I agree too about the Fountain of Youth. That was a setup for the closers, so that tempers whatever enthusiasm I might have for Bourbon War. But he's okay.
Let's talk about a couple of other horses in this race. I mean, I think the horse is going to be the big underlay in here is the local Hope Always Mining. He comes into this 6 straight wins, 5 of them in overwhelming fashion. I think he's a horse with plenty of holes in him, not the least of which is his flashy past performance lines are going to make him a lower price than his actual chances of winning. What do you think about Always Mining?
I don't like him. I mean, the horse who was second to him last time, had won only a maiden 40 claimer. The time before that, he had he benefited from a slow pace in a race where the speed ran 1-2. I think that, looking back on the figures, I think that that figure of 96 might be slightly inflated by a couple points. I mean, I'm responsible for the Laurel Figs, and it sort of came out a big number, but looking at all the horses in the field and what they've done subsequently, I don't think he's that good. So I'd be against him.
What about another twist of fate, Andy? He finished second in Lexington as the favorite to Owendale, who you picked second. He's actually, I was skeptical of this horse when he went on this big tear on synthetic racing, on Golden Gate synthetic main track over the winter in winning the El Camino Real Derby in a runaway. But he has handled dirt well in his last 2 starts. Finished second in the Sunland Derby, finished second in the Lexington. Didn't have absolutely ideal trips in either race. What's your read on? I think
he's okay. I mean, the Sunland Derby was a good race. That was a race where like a lot of horses have on that day have run bigger figures than we gave him. It could have been better, a little bit better than a 94. I mean, I used cutting humor in my Kentucky Derby play. So I respect him, but that's one of the, that's one of the reasons I, respect Owendale is that he really blew past him like he was standing still. And, in the Keeneland race, and and another twist of fate is, I think is a fairly legitimate horse. So it makes me like Owendale a little more.
Who were some of the other horses? I mean, you say that you picked Improbable on top, and Owendale second, and Bourbon War third.
No, Owendale on top. He's
you picked Owendale on top.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And over Improbable, and then Bourbon War.
And just out of desperation, I put War of Will fourth because I really, I'm not crazy about anybody else, but I think after those, after Bourbon War, it was a little bit of a stretch to come up with somebody you thought would be a legitimate contender here.
One horse who I have a fairly strong opinion on in this race, and it's not a good one for this race, but I'd like to get your opinion on him too, is Win Win Win. I have been on the record repeatedly as saying Win 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 is, to my way of looking at him, a prototypical closing sprinter. And he did finish third in the Tampa Bay Derby, and he gained some ground. You know, he passed some horses in the stretch then. I give him a little extra credit for finishing second in the Bluegrass Stakes, because the track at Keeneland, the main track at Keeneland that day, I thought was decidedly speed favoring. So I give a little credit. Of course, then you have to remember that the horse he knows for second was Signal Man. And then he came back and he was finished 10th in the Kentucky Derby without an excuse that I saw. His Beyers, 89, 88, and 89, his last three starts, are 10, 11, and 10 points lower than the big Beyer he got for winning the Pasco 4 starts back, a 7-furlong sprint at Tampa. And he just looks to me like a closing sprinter. But, you know, there are some people that don't see it that way.
Yeah, well, that figure of the, you know, I wish that 99 would go away, because I'm sure it, you know, you look at that and you say, boy, this horse, you know, if it fits with, you know, with the best 3-year-olds. But I agree completely. I mean, while that, you know, that figure was legitimate, and he was really visually impressive in that Tampa race too. But I think after, you know, after, you know, 3 unsuccessful 2-turn races, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, he's not a 2-turn horse, at least at this level.
Well, before we move on from the Preakness and maybe talk about a couple of other races at Pimlico on Saturday's undercard or on Friday that might have caught your eye, let's talk about just a couple more horses. I'm not going to punish you and ask you your opinion on Market King, Signal Man, or Everfast, but I will ask you about the two horses coming into this race off wins at Oaklawn. They being Warrior's Charge, who actually won his last 2 races at Oaklawn in romping fashion, and whose owners put up $150,000 to run in this race, and Laughing Fox, who got up to win the Oakland Park Invitational, which, if I'm not mistaken, was actually a win and you're in for the Preakness. So what are your reads on those two, Andy?
Well, you know, Warrior's Charge, you know, got a speed figure that makes him a contender in here. That was I was following Oaklawn this winter, and you know, and that was a day where I thought the you know, the rail was an edge. I mean, not a major gold
I agree
rail,
completely.
But
I
I
agree
thought
totally.
He had a you know, a favorable trip. Laughing Fox, you know, had a pretty good pace in front of him last time and beat a pretty weak field. You know, let's say the following Oaklawn this winter, I certainly learned to respect Steve Asmussen, you know, when at first glance his horses look overmatched in a race, but I don't think this horse could do it, even with the you know, with his trainer's touch.
Did you have an opportunity to handicap some of the undercard races on Saturday's card?
I did. You can, I mean, pick one, whatever race you'd like to talk about. I'll have a
why don't you give me why don't you give me opinion on one of the undercard stakes that you feel more strongly about?
Well, let's say in the very one at 5 furlongs, if I can get the morning line price of 3 to 1 on JoJo Air, I would take it. You know, of course it's Wesley Ward, which I mean, I will always respect him, and of course he'll always get bet. But I mean, he he was, even though the speed figure was not that much, I mean, he was in a speed duel with a 1-10 favorite named Bulletin, who won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Sprint last fall. I think that's a better credential that than anyone he's facing in the very one. So I mean, Jojo Air would be maybe a key for me in sequential bets.
Interestingly enough, the horse that on the undercard Saturday that I'm most interested in comes in the race right after the very one stakes, so that's in the Galleret. And I'm interested in number 9, Barca. And I think that Barca might get a little bit lost here in the betting ring. And I'm not at all concerned about the fact that in her one U.S. start last fall, in a Sands Point stakes at Belmont that wasn't the strongest Sands Point we ever saw, she finished 8th, beaten 10.5 lengths, and that was last. The turf course that day was just bottomless. And I know that Barca in her younger days was a Group 3 winner on a heavy course at Longchamp. So, that would that could lead you to believe that Barca should have handled the course in the Sands Point better. I'm willing to forgive her for that performance. She has a line, her 3 starts back in a Group 1 stake race. Actually, the French 2,000 Guineas, where she was only beaten a length and a quarter. And that race is plenty good enough to win this spot. And like I said, I think, she's trained by Chad Brown, but I think, and so the layoff doesn't concern me one bit. I mean, there are a few trainers in the game, if any, that are better with layoff horses than him. And I just think that she's liable to fall through the cracks betting-wise and might be a bigger price. I don't think she'll necessarily be the 6-1 that she is in the morning line, but I think she could be every bit of between 4-1 and 5-1 in this spot, and I'm very intrigued with her.
Yeah, I thought there were, unfortunately, there's not much depth in this field. I think there are only 3 horses who can win. I mean, the 1, 2, and 9. Obviously, you've got the other Chad Brown horse in Flexibility, who will, who never runs a bad race and will probably be the favorite. And the rail horse, I'm So Fancy, like your horse Barca, it was a graded stakes winner overseas, and and Delacour, trainer, he just does well with almost every kind of horse, and just has a great record on the turf, and often kind of falls through the cracks, whereas every Chad Brown horse nowadays gets hammered. So I would certainly want to include I'm So Fancy on my ticket with the other Euro.
Let's move on to Friday, Andy, and talk about the 2 big ones on Friday, if that's okay with you, the Black Eyed Susan,
sure,
and the Pimlico Special. Let's talk about the Black Eyed Susan first. I've got a pretty firm opinion in here, and I don't like either one of the horses that are the favorites on the morning line, they being Point of Honor and Cookie Dough. Point of Honor is the 5-2 favorite on the morning line, and she's only run 3 times. And she did win the Suncoast Stakes 2 starts back in her second career start at Tampa. And last time out, she did finish 4th in the Gulfstream Park Oaks and has only beaten 2 lengths. But the day that she won the Suncoast at Tampa was a day where the rail was absolutely dead. And Point of Honor was out in the best part of the track every step of the way, while the runner-up in that race, Lady Kate, was off the rail and then for some mysterious reason drifted to the inside just above the quarter pole, and then it's like all of a sudden she was caught in quicksand. So I think her Point of Honor Suncoast looks better on paper than it really was. And in the Gulfstream Park Oaks, not a bad effort looking on paper, fourth beaten 2 lengths. But she finished behind a horse in Cookie Dough, who I believe, at least at this stage of her career, does not really want to go 2 turns. Cookie Dough went 2 turns for the second time against Open Company in the Gulfstream Park Oaks, and she tired after controlling what I thought was a reasonable pace. She did win 2 turns in September at Gulfstream, but that was in that Florida Stallion series, that restricted series where you run against all kinds of odd horses. And I really think Cookie Dough is much more of a 1-turn horse. The 2 that I like in this race are Always Shopping and Brill. Always Shopping is improving with every single start. She's loving distance. They the connections turned their back on the Kentucky Oaks and pointed to this race. I thought her last effort was pretty solid, and I know she's going to love every bit of the 1 1/8 that this race offers. And as for Brill, there was a time briefly last summer in California where there was talk she might have been the best 2-year-old filly in Southern California. She's disappointed.
Well, that talk lasted like 1 day. But,
it went away quickly. But, something, and she has lost her last 4 races. But, Jerry Hollendorfer's bringing her to this spot. Her race in the Fantasy wasn't all that bad. She was away from the inside on April 12th. That was the day that both you and I thought the rail was the place to be. And in fact, Lady Apple, who won the Fantasy, came right up the inside to do it.
Right.
And Brill, I don't think, was on the best part of the racetrack. So for me, in the Black Eyed Susan, I'm looking at Always Shopping and Brill.
I just, how about you? I don't, I'm not going to dispute anything you said. I just feel that the competition in those Florida stakes, or where that Cookie Dough was running in, was a notch above what Always Shopping and Brill were doing. I wasn't crazy about either of those fields, whereas Cookie Dough was running against some pretty good horses like Champagne, Anyone. I mean, I know it was a 1-turn race, her previous one at a mile, but she was dueling with Jaywalk, who's super fast and, is the defending champion of her age group. And, she dueled her.
Who's been terrible this year.
Pardon? Yeah, I know. I just think that
Cookie Dough got beaten that race by a 51-1 shot.
Well, that's true. I'm not betting my life here, but I just lean to the 2 Florida horses. But I won't fight you on this one.
Okay. The Black Eyed Susan is race 11 Friday at Pimlico. Let's talk about the Pimlico Special, which is race 10. And this, I think, is a crazy race. And Andy, you go first here, and maybe you've got.
Let's talk about the craziest thing. You had a race with a long history at 1 3/16. 1 3/16 is the distance of the Preakness, so it made having the Pimlico Special the day before certainly a nicer counterpoint. The idea that we should change the distance and run the first 1.25 mile race run at Pimlico in this century really doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I mean, plus the fact it would have been nice just to make sure the teletimer works for 1 3/16 too, but that's a whole other issue.
Exactly, and I predict if there were a price on it, I'd be betting on a teletimer malfunction at the 1.25 mile distance. When I presume they have a real short run up to the gate,
Right.
from the back of that chute. And
Right.
as as we know, in a similar configuration, the 1 mile races at Gulfstream, also owned by the Stronach Group, that some of the times, have been ludicrous because, of timer malfunctions at that short run up. That's all I'll say about that. But anyway, I found
about
this
the
a
field?
tough race.
Yeah.
Well, at least they got 14 horses, which is certainly a positive. But gee, this is a weak group. One thing I'd like to say about the 2 days of racing at Pimlico. I mean, and it's good. These are engaging fields, but we all talk about the 2 week turnaround between the Derby and the Preakness, discouraging horses going from the Derby to the Preakness. I mean, nobody wants to do it. I'm shocked that Maximum Security didn't take a shot at it. But all these other horses who ran in big stakes at the Derby are all passing up. The counterpart races at the Preakness. Nobody from the Kentucky Oaks showed up to run for $250,000 in the Black-Eyed Susan, and there are only a couple horses all day who or all weekend at Pimlico who ran at Churchill Downs. And I just think I used to be a purist on this subject, but I think that a change of the timing of the Preakness is really overdue. So maybe
goodness,
that's off.
We have something else to completely disagree on, but we're going to save that for a webinar of another time. Let's give out a couple of picks in the Pimlico special because we are running out.
Well,
of time.
my pick, and it's a pretty shaky one, is number 13. You're to Blame. I mean, I thought that. This horse ran some, solid figures last summer and last fall. Was laid up, and he was running 1.5 miles, 1.5 5/8 on his best form. He came back at 1.16 miles, which really didn't suit him. I mean, the jockey was hustling him all the way just to keep him in contention early, and he won the race. The figure was not much, but I think his form last year was good enough, that his second off a layoff. I mean, he can win this race. It's his distance.
I think this race is just crazy. And if you ran it 10 times, you might get 9 different results. And because of that, I think that you've got to go price shopping in here. I'm just not enthralled with any of the horses who figure to take money in here. They all have weaknesses. They all have holes. And I'm just going to take a flyer with the sharp local horse, Cordmaker. He's won 3 of his last 4 starts. Why not? I mean, there's nobody so imposing in this race to make you want to get off this horse. I think the added distance will actually help him. I think, he won at 1.8 miles 2 starts back, then cut back and just romped at 7 furlongs in his most recent start. Why can't he stretch out even a little bit further this time? Like I said, he's won 3 out of his last 4. He's in career form. His Beyer of 97 last time was a career best. And he's running against a bunch of horses who might be past their prime or have significant holes. I think you got to take a price in here. Why not Cordmaker, who's going to be double-digit odds?
All right. I think he's reasonable. I'm not going to knock a horse with a high Beyer.
Nor should you. So that's it. I think that's it for our webinar. If our moderator Jake is still back on the line, he could take over.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining, guys. And let's good luck tomorrow for everybody and Saturday.